I'm sure Javid and Kevin will be able to figure it out. Yeah. Are you happy to be in church today? Yeah, that sounds extremely convincing. Guys, we are in part 6 of our never-ending series called God's Not Dead. And of course that was my opening joke because tonight it ends. Tonight is the last installment of our series. As most of you know, a couple of weeks ago we had Dr. Rice Brooks and Dr. Brian Miller here who went on a missions week with us. So for a week all across London we put on events and we spoke on the topic of God's Not Dead. And Dr. Brooks and Dr. Miller delivered some very compelling evidence for us to believe that there is a God. Okay? In this crazy age of uncertainty, in this crazy age where everyone tends to believe just whatever he or she likes, we have put on these events trying to proclaim there is evidence in this world that a creator exists, and not just a creator, not just a God somewhere out there, but the God of the Bible, and his name is Jesus. Now, after this missions week, across all our congregations in London, we went into the 6-week preaching series, and every week we went into where we took a closer look at one of those evidences that were in the book. So in the first week, we just had a general look at real faith is not blind. You know how a lot of people in this world believe that you can only believe in a God if you close your eyes, cover your ears, switch off your brain, and then you make a leap of faith. But that seems to be the public perception in a place like London. You can only really believe in a God if you shut down everything that has to do with intellect and you take a leap of faith. And we said that's not the case at all. That's not the case at all. Not the case at all. And we believe that faith, as the Bible describes it, is much more of a trust to something that we think is trustworthy rather than a blind leap of faith. Then in the second week we went through the topic of good and evil. How a lot of people would say, because there's so much evil in this world, I can't possibly believe in a God. But as a matter of fact, the philosophical logic behind it is the other way around. Unless there's a God, there's no evil in this world. All you can say is the world is just the way it is. So we had a look at this. All of those sermons are recorded, by the way, so you can have a look at the website if one of that interests you. After that, we took a closer look at, there was a beginning. We said that this universe had a dust, and this universe will have a dawn. So in other words, this universe is not eternal, and therefore we believe that a first cause for this universe is outside of it, and that's what we believe is God. After that, we took a look at purpose. We spoke about purpose, and we said, unless there's a God, we can't possibly find purpose in this world. We may find things that interest us, we may find things that we want to do, but unless there's a creator, an inventor of a machine, the machine would never know its purpose. So unless there's a God, there's no purpose. And then last week, we took a closer look at the resurrection, sort of the prime miracle in the Bible. And we said that there is, historically speaking, a lot of evidence that makes us believe that something extraordinary happened 2,000 years ago in Jerusalem. And tonight we're going to pick up right where we left off last week. And we will start with this verse here. In Revelation 12:11, John writes, and they have defeated him. He's writing about the Christians, the early Christians, have defeated him, the devil, by the blood of the Lamb and by their testimony. And they did not love their lives so much that they were afraid to die. So, what he's saying is, this early church that has been persecuted in so many ways, the only reason they were strong enough to hold on, and the only reason that Christianity, from a bunch of fishermen to the world's biggest religion, was only able to be spread because of the blood of the Lamb, meaning through the help of God. God was on their side. And secondly, through the power of the testimony. There's something powerful in our testimony. And tonight we're going to look at exactly that. We're going to look at the power of our testimony. And I want to speak about two things in particular. I want to speak about the power of our testimony as a church, and then the power of our testimony as individuals. Okay. If you look at this verse, you see that John, the writer of Revelations, assumes that there is a spiritual battle going on. And he says the Christians have overcome the devil in this spiritual battle by the testimony. And that should give us a sense of how important testimony is. There's something very, very powerful and strong about it. So let's look at this. But first, let's ask the simple question. Why does church exist? Why does the Christian church exist? Why do we meet here? If you... Don't worry, you don't have to answer it. It's sort of really quite common. If you would ask people, if you ask the average Joe out there, why does the Christian church exist? They would probably say something along the lines, this Jesus guy was a fantastic teacher. He had all these advanced teachings, these progressive and kind teachings, and the church exists to pass on these teachings to the world and to the next generations. And in a way we all sort of assume that. Maybe we even do that at church. But the truth of the matter is, it's not the case at all. Okay? Because at the bottom line of this assumption is the idea that Jesus was somehow a teacher of morality. That Jesus was somehow a good guy whom everyone just really loved, and he walked across this earth, and when he died people were so sad, so they built a church to keep his teachings alive. Now again, that's really not the case at all. I've just randomly selected some quotes that Jesus made. The first one is this. He said in John 14 verse 6, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. So what he's saying is, okay, forget everything you have ever heard by anyone about religion. I am the only one who knows. Now, I don't know about you, but to me that doesn't sound like a teacher of morality. That sounds like somebody who has been out in the heat for too long. The second thing he said is, and that's a remarkable verse, whoever eats my flesh and drinks my blood remains in me and I in him. Now again, that should affirm our suspicion that there might have been a screw loose somewhere. And then the last thing he said, if God were your father, you would love me, for I came from God and now I am here. So this person, 2,000 years ago, was wandering through the desert, telling everyone that he's God, and that they should forsake their father and mother and their siblings, and they should take up all the love that they can muster up, and they should give it to him, and then follow him. That's not a teacher of morality. And we've presented this quote by C.S. Lewis quite often. That's either a person who's mad, a madman, a lunatic, somebody who's crazily deluded, or B, it is a liar. Yeah, he knows exactly that he's not the Son of God, but he makes people believe he is for whatever agenda he has, raised to power, do whatever. And the only other option we have left is that it's actually true what he said. That it's actually true that he is who he says he is, the only way to the Father. The only one who knows the Father really. So those are the three options, and we have to make up our mind who we think that Jesus is. And so you see this idea that the church is sort of the teaching institution of moralities that Jesus preached does not apply at all. What is the church then, if it's not that? What I'm proposing to you tonight is that the church is the living testimony of the resurrection of Jesus. I'm going to say it again because I really think it's important. The church is the living testimony of the resurrection of Jesus. All the church ever really did is to vouch with its life and its existence for the truth of the resurrection. Okay. How do I say that? Intuitively, it sort of sounds right, especially in a Christian saying. It seems to make sense, but what do I actually mean when I say that? Look at those two verses, 1 Corinthians 15, verse 13. Paul says, if Christ has not been raised, then our preaching is in vain, and your faith is in vain. So in other words, what he's saying is that everything in this church, everything in Christianity, hinges on this one event, which is the resurrection. Every single Christianity, or especially the church, is a club with only one membership fee. Only one thing you must do to be part of this club. He's saying that again in Romans 10 verse 9. If you confess with your mouth the Lord Jesus and believe in your heart that God has raised him from the dead, you too will be saved. He doesn't say if you believe in the Trinity, if you believe that the Bible is inerrant, if you believe this doctrine, and if you believe that, and all of it. Don't get me wrong, guys, I'm not saying that doctrine and that is not important. But what I'm saying is everything in the church, everything in Christianity hinges on the resurrection. The only membership fee that we have to pay to be part of this club is to believe in the resurrection. Believe with all our heart in the resurrection. As a consequence of believing in the resurrection, proclaim that Jesus is Lord. What does that mean? How can we do that? I want to give you a bit of a summary. We don't have time to really go in depth into what has happened and then what kind of proof do we have for the resurrection. If you're interested in that, I'm going to invite you for Thursday. We're going to have a debate on Thursday here at Imperial College, and we're going to speak more about the technicalities of this historical context of Jesus' resurrection. But Javid is going to tell you some more about that later. But for now, we're going to look at this one here, the timeline of events, and I want to quickly try to break down for you what has happened and why I believe there's good evidence for us to have faith in the resurrection of Christ. Okay? So what do we know of these events that took place 2,000 years ago, these events that completely transformed the face of the earth? We divide history into two parts, before Christ and after Christ. So something extraordinary must have happened at that time. So what do we know about it? We know that about 2015, 2018 years ago, Jesus was born. Jesus was born, and then roughly 33 years later, he died under Pontius Pilate. There's plenty of historical evidence for that, in the Bible and outside the Bible. There are writers like Tacitus, Flavius, who give us a very good account of Jesus. And this is what we clearly know about Jesus, that he lived and that he died under Pontius Pilate. This is what every source says. And Bart Ehrman, a critic, an atheist, wrote a book, and he said this: I have no interest in promoting Christianity, but I tell you this: Jesus lived and he died under Pontius Pilate. And everyone who tries to negate that has some other agenda which this denial serves. So if you look at the facts of history, you will not be able to say Jesus was just some kind of some person that was made up by his disciples. He was an actual person. He actually lived and he died under Pontius Pilate. Now, after the crucifixion, and we're going to again talk more about this on Thursday, but the next thing we know is that when Jesus was crucified, he surely died. Okay? There are religions in this world that believe that Jesus died but not on the cross. He sort of survived the cross. And if you know anything about crucifixion, if you know anything about what the Romans did to those people which they hung on those crosses, you know that it is it is completely impossible to survive a crucifixion. As a matter of fact, 200 years after Jesus, the Romans abolished crucifixion because it was simply too cruel. It was such a horrible procedure which people underwent when they were crucified. And there is no way anyone could have possibly survived it. So this is what we know: Jesus lived and he died on the cross. And then the next thing we know is that he was laid into a tomb. Now we have, again, plenty of sources that would say that. If you question the authenticity of the story that Jesus was laid into the tomb, again, I encourage you to read up on it. But there's nothing in that story that's supernatural. As a matter of fact, it's very, very credible. It's across all the Gospels. It is mentioned by Paul in his earliest letters. It was certainly believed by all Christians that lived at that time. And it even has embarrassing facts, you know. That's when historians try to understand if a historic account which they find in a source is for real, they look for a couple of indicators. And one of those indicators is that story embarrassing? Another indicator is, are there dissimilarities in different accounts? Okay, so for example, if you read the Gospels next to each other, you see that there are slight differences. Now, that doesn't mean that the Gospels are not credible. As a matter of fact, that is why they are credible, because those are real accounts. If you see a car accident and you have 4 reports, they will all differ to some extent, because it's just how people perceive it. So you look for the similarities, and you find those in the Gospels about the tomb story, and you look for embarrassment. So in other words, if somebody wanted to make up that kind of story, if somebody decided to invent the story of the tomb, he wouldn't have invented it this way. Why? Because the guy who laid Jesus in the tomb was one of the Jewish leaders. Those were the guys that had just crucified Jesus. So if you're a follower of Jesus, you will naturally have very strong feelings of hatred and anger towards the Jewish establishment, and you will not make up a story in which one of them is a hero. Okay? So those are just small indicators and factors why almost all New Testament scholars believe that this story, this account of the tomb, is actually for real. So Jesus died on the cross, then he was brought into the tomb. Then the next thing we know is 3 days later the tomb was empty. And again, there's plenty of evidence for that. The tomb was full with Jesus. 3 days later, it was empty. No Jesus body in there anymore. And what we see after that is that a whole range of people have so-called post-mortem experiences of Jesus. Now, that Jesus as they knew him, who was in the tomb but now he's not in the tomb anymore, he appeared to a vast number of people. First, he appeared to the women. And again, that's one of those embarrassment stories. Yeah, if you wanted to make up a story and you said this person that we've just killed is actually alive, and then somebody would ask you, how do you know? And your answer in that time was, because the women told us. That's not very credible. Okay? Because women were said to not be very reliable, trustworthy at that time. So if you made up the story, you would have made it up differently. So first the women saw him, then Peter saw him, and then John saw him, then all the apostles saw him. Then Paul saw him, and then Paul quotes that there were 500 people in Jerusalem which had those experiences with Jesus. And he wrote that at a time where those people were still alive. He even says 500 people saw Jesus, and many of them are still alive. Okay? So he wrote this to a church in Corinth and telling them, look for the evidence yourself. Those people over there, they are still alive. They have had those experiences. If you don't believe me, ask them and they will tell you that they've experienced Jesus after his death. And then what you see, lastly, here is the birth of the church at Pentecost, where Peter just went up and proclaimed that Jesus is risen from the dead, and they started to speak in languages that they didn't know, and the early church was formed. And now in the midst of all of this, there must have been some kind of transformative event. Something very, very powerful. Something that would make a cut right through human history. An event that would leave somebody like Peter, who just ran away when Jesus was persecuted. He ran away and denied Jesus. Then something has happened, and suddenly he becomes somebody who proclaims the gospel and even dies for it. Peter was crucified upside down. This is how much he was. This is the extent to which he was certain that Jesus was indeed raised from the dead. So you have somebody like Peter. You have obviously the tomb. It was full, then it's empty. So something has happened. And then you have somebody like James. James was a younger brother of Jesus. In Jesus' early ministry, when Jesus started preaching those things that I've just showed you, proclaiming that he's the Son of God, Jesus' mother and his siblings came and they told people, don't take him seriously, okay? Because they were afraid, because if they knew exactly if Jesus kept preaching like this, he's going to eventually get himself killed. So they told everyone, don't take him seriously, he has gone mad. How many of you have a younger brother? Okay. I have two younger brothers and I love them dearly. But for me to say that one of them is God, there must be something more than brotherly affection. There must be something really, really that makes me sure, because I know my brothers inside out, and I know they're not God, okay? And most of you who have brothers know exactly, your brother is not God. And somebody like James, who in the beginning would say, I know my brother, he's not God. he's probably gone insane. To then come to a place where he becomes one of the leaders of the church. And if you study the history, you will learn that James was sawn in half. So they threatened him and told him, renounce this thing you've just said. Renounce that Jesus has not been raised from the dead, and we'll let you live. He said, no, I'm certain about it. As a punishment, they were sawing him in half. This is how certain James was. So there must have been something, again, transformative that has happened to those people. Now, what are the explanations? What are the common explanations for this? And the truth of the matter is, there are not many around there. And no explanation has ever attracted many followers. No explanation as to why the tomb was empty, and no explanation as to why these transformations in people's lives has happened, has ever attracted many followers. The first and probably most obvious conclusion was the one that's even recorded in the Bible. So the Jewish leaders said, well, the apostles, probably Jesus' followers, they came at night and they stole his body to make up that story. Okay? Now, let's for a moment completely disregard that there was a whole army standing around Jesus' grave, protecting it, and let's for a moment forget that this mega stone lay in front of the entrance, and that the 12 fishermen somehow at night went there and pushed away that stone and stole the body. Let us look at the psychological side of things. Now, what they're basically claiming is that the disciples came, took Jesus' body, and buried him somewhere in the garden, and started proclaiming, he's alive, he's alive. And then they took it to their death, the most horrific death. Now, if the disciples were real people like you and I, at the moment you're threatening me with death, and I know what I'm telling is a lie anyway, I'm not going to go to my grave for that. I'm going to say, oh, hang on, I have to reconsider. Well, maybe he's not raised. He has not been raised from the dead, okay? So from liars just make very, very bad martyrs. From a psychological perspective, it's almost impossible to believe that the apostles took his body. So what is another explanation that people have tried? Another explanation is that there were mass hallucinations around that time in Jerusalem. That just 500 people somehow made up that they saw Jesus. Okay? Well, psychiatrists will tell you there is no such thing as a mass hallucination. What you've just done is you've invented a miracle in order to get rid of a miracle in the first place. And again, that has never attracted many followers, this kind of theory. Then there's a theory that the Muslim faith has brought forth about 600 years after the resurrection, without the slightest shred of evidence. They've said, well, actually Jesus never really died on the cross, he survived it, and then he was on his way to Medina. Now, if you're a Muslim, and you read that in your holy book, and you sort of have to believe in that, that's fine. But you can only do that if you really shove history out of the window. There's no shred of evidence, nothing, that would sustain that kind of, this remarkable claim that Jesus somehow survived the crucifixion and went to Medina. Especially not after the kind of treatment he received from the Romans, where his skin must have just hung like ribbons of his blood. Anyway, so those were the common explanations, and there has never really been another one that has attracted any kind of followers. So what we can say is the most reasonable, the most logical conclusion is the one that the early apostles certainly believed, that Jesus was indeed raised from the dead, that he is indeed who he claimed to be. Why is the resurrection so significant? Because it proves who Jesus is. He said, I'm going to die and then I'm going to be raised 3 days afterwards. And because he has done that, that's proof for his divinity. That's why the resurrection is so important. And if you think about it, it's not so difficult to believe. Okay? Why? Because all it requires is a God. The moment there's a God, resurrection is completely possible. And all throughout these 6 weeks that we've done our Gods Not Dead series, we have tried to look at this world as it is. We've tried to look at philosophical, at anthropological, at historical facts, and we have made the claim, and I think it's a very valid claim, that we can believe in a God. And if that God exists, we can certainly believe in the resurrection. And now, again, sort of bringing this all together, this is what the church is about. The church is a living proof that Jesus was raised from the dead. Sorry, the slide's a little bit out of order. I want us, in a moment, to watch a video, because what has happened is that the early church was formed. The Bible teaches that there's not only God, but there's also the devil. And the devil knew exactly, if this church continues to live on as a living proof for the resurrection of Jesus, he's going to be in trouble. So what he has tried from the very first moment is to kill the church. Because he knew exactly if the church would never get out of the blocks, then no one would know. Then Jesus would have been raised, but hey, who knows? And so he tried his best to kill the church. And if you read up, if you maybe even watch some videos, some movies that we are doing now, about what the Roman Empire in particular has done to Christians, it's just unbelievable. Hebrews 11 talks about those heroes of faith, and it concludes that those people, the earth was not worthy of those people who have given their lives in so many trials, in so many afflictions. The young Christians were persecuted, they were whipped, they were sawn in half, they were put up as living torches and light on fire, they were fed to the lions of the Roman emperors. Horrific, horrific things. But what they did is they overcame that by the blood of the Lamb and by the power of the testimony, because they testified that Jesus indeed was raised from the dead, and they were willing to die for it. So the church was and is a living voucher for the resurrection of Christ. And now let's have a look at this video. It's called Quo Vadis. It's a snippet of the movie Quo Vadis. It was filmed in sometime in the 40s. It's one of those old monumental films. I think it's amazing. And it at the center of the story is a young Christian slave that falls in love with one of the Roman officers. And what you see around there, sort of in the periphery of the story, is Christianity as it was persecuted. Okay? So just look at those pictures and just, understand what it means that the church is a living testimony.
May give the signal, divinities.
Peace to the martyrs! Peace, peace to them. Take thy children, Lord. Numb their wounds, suffer
church, we stand in the proud tradition of those people. Of those people who have vouched with their lives for the truth of the resurrection. And you know how easy it is today in our society. Well, I don't want to go to church today. I don't know.